Good morning, everyone. I think it's time to start soon. It's really great to see you all here, and welcome to the AfricaMaVal consortium, but also to the other invited experts. So we have here really a big wealth of knowledge and experts coming together, and it's great that we can discuss this relevant topic, secondary raw materials and inclusive recycling in Africa, which is part of the AfricaMaVal project. So quickly about myself, I'm working as communications officer at the World Resources Forum, and I recently started to get involved also in the AfricaMaVal project. And I'm hosting this webinar together with our managing director, Matthias Schlepp, and of course, also others from our team are here at the webinar. So we would like to record the webinar, and as you have seen already in the chat, you can always put your questions there, or if there's something, you can also raise your hand directly. So feel free to interact and also to share your experience. So I don't want to take too much time, but I will give you a quick overview about the agenda, since we have a really exciting program. I will give you a very short introduction about AfricaMaVal. That's of course for the people that are not part of the consortium, that are invited to this webinar externally. And then we will have the input presentations from Vanessa about the e-waste volumes in Africa, from Noemi about legislative frameworks, from Susan about the e-waste value chains and key actors in Africa. Then we will have two exciting practical examples from recyclers, from DESCO and Electro-Recycling Ghana. And this will be followed by a panel discussion at the end with all the speakers that were part of this webinar. So about the project AfricaMaVal, just in a very brief snapshot, it has the two main goals: to secure access to mineral resources and to foster responsible value chains. And this is done by developing EU-African partnerships, which should ensure a responsible sourcing of critical raw materials for the European industry, and also granting a sustainable local co-development in the best ESG conditions, so environmental, social, government conditions, which should also lead to a long-term business environment for European and African companies. So the final aim is to identify responsible investment opportunities in Africa. What you see also very good in this slide, that's the overview about the 7-step strategy. So the end goal is to identify potential projects, preferably African-owned, along the whole value chains, from exploration to recycling, and then to have this as a responsible investment opportunities. So the steps 1 to 4 that you see here on the slides, they are creating input for the next steps 5, 6, and 7 for the business network, for the strategy, and for identifying the investment opportunities. We are now in the step 2 in the work package 2, where we're trying to map and identify these projects, and where we also include secondary raw materials as important topic. So just very briefly as an overview, we have a broad consortium in the project with partners from Europe and Africa, from very different sectors and backgrounds. And now focusing more on our webinar today, that's part of a series. There was a first webinar taking place in 2022, more a general introduction about the secondary raw material value chains. Now we are focusing more on the recycling country profiles in Africa, and also the economic linkages between informal and formal recycling sector. And beginning of next year, there will be a third internal webinar, which focuses more on the investment opportunities, which will be the final result of the project. So with this, I would like to hand over to Matthias.
Thank you, Vanessa. This was a good overview of the AfricaMaVal project. If you have questions to this, there's still opportunity at the end to pose your questions. First, I would like to introduce Vanessa Forti. She will give us an overview of e-waste volumes in Africa. She's Associate Program Officer at the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITA. UNITA is one of the institutions who publishes the Global E-Waste Monitor. And of course, she will talk about the numbers they just published 1 or 2 months ago. Vanessa, you can tell me more in the Global E-Waste Monitor. Previously, the team doing this Global E-Waste Monitor was also known as being the team of UNU, so that was a change. Now it's UNITA, but with the same people. So I will give you the word, Vanessa. Rebecca, will give you the power to shift the slides yourself. And yeah, and if you have, or if you want that we shifted, you just let us know. Up to you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Matthias, and everybody for the invitation and the opportunity to present this important topic. So indeed, I'm working at the UNITAR cycle program that is based in Bonn. I will indeed try to, I'm moving the slides myself, I guess. Yes, great. Okay, so this so the cycle program is based in Bonn, as I was saying, and joined UNITAR after the transition from the UNU, as Matthias said. We have 20 years of experience in research, policy advice, training, capacity building, and especially we focus on e-waste quantification. We indeed publish regularly global e-waste monitors with the aim to inform policymakers, but also the wider society on the progress of the e-waste generation, on the development over time, and also on the achievements in terms of recycling, also in terms of imports and exports and transboundary movements. We also develop similar methodologies for quantification for batteries, plastics, and also textiles. So few words about the Global E-Waste Statistic Partnership. We indeed publish the Global E-Waste Monitor in the context of the GESP, so the Global E-Waste Statistic Partnership, that also together with ITU and other recent partners such UNEP, we also collaborate on together on gathering data global level, analyzing data, and also publishing them not only on the Global E-Waste Monitor but also on the website, as you see it here. So the idea is really to have an up-to-date website and database with the most recent data that relates to e-waste generation, collection, and transboundary movements. So indeed, this is the monitor that was published in March this year, so it's pretty recent, and today I'm gonna share with you a few data and results and highlights of the monitor. So from our estimations, we estimated that we concluded that at global level we generated 62 billion kilograms of e-waste generated in 2022. This actually corresponds to This actually corresponds to 7.8 kilograms per capita. So this is actually a measure that we use to also try to understand a bit this quantity. So how much this 62 billion kilograms corresponds when it comes down to per person. So this is 7.8 kilograms per capita in the year of 2022. And but when it comes to e-waste documented as formally collected and recycled from the data that we collected from various countries in the world, we concluded that only 22.3% was documented to be formally collected and recycled. So you see that there is a big room for improvement in that sense. Looking at the different categories and also answering the question to, let's say, which category contributes the most to the e-waste generation, definitely small equipment is the one that is contributing the most. These are numbers at global level. It may vary per continent, per region or country. However, the trend that we observe is that small equipment are contributing the most, with 20.4 billion kilograms in 2022. Large equipment, excluding PV, so photovoltaic panels, comes second. Most likely, in the future, we expect photovoltaic panels to increase very rapidly in the next 4 to 5 years. We will see large quantities of photovoltaic panels coming to the waste generation. So we expect also the large equipment category to be also increasing. As you see now, photovoltaics contributes only to a minimum part, but this is because technologies were introduced a few years ago, and the average lifetime of PVs also so far does not enable PVs to come to the waste generation. But with the also substitution and technology update, definitely they will be replaced soon and they will come to waste very soon. Then we have temperature exchange equipment, screen and monitors, and small AT and lamps at last. Yeah, so with regards to the trend, sorry, I think I moved too fast. I don't know how to go back. Can you help me, Rebecca, please, to go 2 slides back? Yeah, it's moving only for me on the on the right hand side.
This slide or which one?
No, back. Soon after the graph I just showed.
I think it's just lacking a bit because I went back, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, great. The other one, the next.
Which one? Can you see now?
Yeah, I can see the e-waste generation per type. So and now I will move. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Sorry for this. So yeah, I wanted to say indeed a few words about the global e-waste trends. We make predictions over time, and we try to estimate also how we expect it to evolve in the future. So e-waste generation is now at 62 billion kilograms, but we expect it to become 82 by 2030. However, the e-waste documented as formally collected and recycled will grow much slower. So we are not able to make predictions for e-waste documented, because this is something that are actually real data, not modeled data. However, if we look at the last line of the graph, we see that the speed of growth of e-waste documented and formally collected and documented to be recycled is actually growing at much lower speed compared to the e-waste generation. So since 2010, the growth of e-waste generation is outpacing really the formal collection and recycling by a factor of 5. And this is something we should take in mind for the future, especially when we will think of also expanding the collection and improving the collection of e-waste generation in several countries. So if we focus more in Africa and we look a bit in Africa on how e-waste generation has developed or is developing over time, we observed that from 2010 to 2022, the e-waste generation doubled, even more than doubled. So from 1.6 billion kilograms, the e-waste generation became 3.6 billion kilograms in 2022. However, the formal e-waste collection grew from 0.1% in 2010 to 0.7% in 2022. So again, we see that the growth of e-waste collection is slower compared to the growth of e-waste generation. The growth is also directly linked to the growth in terms of economy, so the purchasing power parity. We see that when there is a growth in terms of purchasing power parity, the speed and the relation of e-waste generation is very direct, very linear. However, is leveling off when comparing the size of purchasing power parity and the economy and the cost with the e-waste generation over time. So when for high income countries, we see this trend leveling off. Yeah, next slide is about I'm trying. Okay, yes, about the highest, the countries with the highest e-waste generation in the region. We also try to look at the countries in different regions and try to identify the ones that are estimated to contribute the most to the e-waste mountain in different areas. And we see that for Africa, the one contributing the most is Egypt. South Africa as well, and Nigeria. Those are the ones contributing the most in terms of total million kilograms produced. However, when we look at the per capita indicator, Libya, Seychelles Island, and the Mauritius are those that are having the highest numbers in terms of kilograms per capita. Yeah, we also analyze transboundary movements. Definitely transboundary movements is a subject that is very much of interest for the African continent, and we at global level estimated that 5.1 billion kilograms of e-waste was shipped across borders in 2022. 65% of this, it was shipped through uncontrolled and undocumented, in an uncontrolled and documented way. And 0.8 of this was flowing from high income countries to low income countries. So you see that this trend, even in 2022, we still is still existing and is still happening, maybe with a change in terms of the flows and dynamics and receiving countries and importing countries, but still it exists, especially the movements from the global north to the global south. When it comes to imports, we quantified imports to be 546 million kilograms. And you see that only a very small part is controlled. The rest, the white portion, is uncontrolled. And the hotspots that we have identified for illegal e-waste imports are still in Western Africa, as well as in emerging East Africa and North African countries. So this is a bit of a new trend that we are observing from the numbers and the studies that we have analyzed. Same for exports. As we see, the export amount is much lower compared to the imports. 132 million kilograms was exported from Africa. This is mainly referring to the reverse flow to EU and Asian recyclers of waste. This is mainly referring to PCBs recycling, so PCBs that are collected in Africa and then shipped to Europe for recycling. But the majority and the most of the exports are happening and still remaining within Africa. In terms of e-waste generated and documented as formally collected by region, here we wanted to also provide a figure on where Africa stands. So as we see here, the continent that is generating the most in terms of per capita is definitely Europe, although in terms of quantities it would be Asia. And Europe is also the region that is reporting a collection rate that is higher compared to other regions. So when it comes to Europe, the collection rate is 42.8%. looking at Africa, this collection rate is lower. It stays at 0.7%, as I was explaining before. But here I would like to make a disclaimer. Of course, those data, as I said earlier, are coming from official data and official statistics. So definitely in countries where there is no legislation in place, or maybe there is no enforcement in place, also the data are not collected in a formal way by the government, and therefore not also reported and communicated. So it could be that in practice this collection rate is higher. It definitely is higher. However, this reflects only the data that governments are reporting as formally collected and recycled. Also, I had one slide. Sorry, I cannot go back, just to show that the higher collection rate is for Rwanda with 23%. This is definitely explained by the fact that Rwanda has a formal recycling center, pretty big and established. South Africa comes second with 4%, and then the other countries are Mauritius, Uganda, and Cameroon that are reporting data on formally collected and recycled. So with this, I would end my presentation, and I thank you very much for the attention, and I'm happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. We would open the possibility to have some more technical questions if you didn't understand something. We will then have more opportunity to ask Vanessa questions at the end when we have our mini panel, and when everybody who has actually talked joins to have a good discussion at the end. But if anybody has a question now, please raise your hand or write it in the chat. I might just have one question, Vanessa, because sometimes it's when you present, it looks like Africa doesn't have almost nothing gets treated of the e-waste with these numbers. But of course, as you already pointed out, this is what gets formally reported. I mean, can you say anything? And this, of course, is one of the key topics of this webinar. I mean, it gets treated, but where does it get treated, some of the e-waste?
Yeah, thank you, Matthias, for the question. Indeed, this gives me the opportunity to explain a bit better this figure. Definitely, this is, as I said, only the formally reported data that member states would communicate to UN agencies or to other institutes or associations that would gather those data, as we also distribute questionnaires yearly to various member states to collect this type of data. However, so far we have seen little data being reported by African member states. And the reason is, in fact, that is hard in our understanding for member states to report on activities that are largely happening informally still. So the informal sector in Africa is very strong and is also really active in terms of collection of electronic waste and recycling. So the recycling is definitely happening. It's mainly treated, in our understanding, still informally. So of course is led mainly by smaller groups that are aiming at also making money with definitely with the most valuable parts of the electronic waste. But this is also, in our understanding, a way of recycling, and it should, according to also the various exchanges we have with member states, it should be given the possibility to include the informal sector also in the system, somehow formalize it, or make sure that the work that the informal sector does is also overseen, recognized, and that the data that the quantities that they are treating and collecting can be also reported under a scheme. So that is the aim, or the wish we have in the future for those African countries, but also other countries that are having a large informal sector operating in the system.
Okay, thanks. We have two more questions in the chat. There's one from Giulio. From Desco, please expand on the Rwanda having a more formal recycling process than South Africa. What factors did you use to come to this conclusion? Then there is one from Noah Bougre. Does the data capture the informal collection volume, or it just focuses on the formal collectors? And what happens to the e-waste export to Africa, for example, in West Africa, North Africa, and emerging in East Africa? That's from Hudson. Maybe we just, if you can keep it short, Vanessa, because we would like then to keep on with the next presentation. We still can take over some of the discussion into the end.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. With regards to the first question, is pretty it's pretty straightforward, because when it comes to Rwanda and South Africa, we also were in contact with the government, and they have figures that comes from really the quantities that are collected and treated by the facilities in Rwanda and in South Africa. So it's not a model data, but are real data that are communicated either by the government or by the formal recycling facilities. When it comes to the second question, is about about the informal collection volumes. As I said earlier, the e-waste formally collected does not include the informal part, and does not include also the e-waste imports and exports. We keep those as a separate indicators. So the formal collection is really whatever is reported as being formally collected in the country itself. It could be that some of the illegal imports comes and flow to the formal collection, but this is very rare, and so far we haven't seen this happening so often, honestly. Thank you. I hope I answered this question.
Okay, yeah, there was new questions coming in. Actually, there is, I think, from the questions about prevention is better than cure. Yes, but I think, excuse me, the one who has asked this is, well, this opens a completely other topic, and maybe it's not really the focus of what we want to discuss today, but it's a very valid question, of course. Maybe just a question that maybe is important: how did you discover the new illegal export import hotspot? So what is your data based on?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Definitely, our data for Africa are based on two studies and projects that we have run in the past. One is the person import that was conducted in Ghana. So it was really hands-on, and there was a person or looking at the imports of e-waste for a period of time in the port of Accra. And for the second project that we also took as a reference is the Reduce E-Waste project, where also Matthias and colleagues from the World Resources Forum was also participating, where we looked also at quantifying the illegal imports, not illegal, but rather e-waste imports. But of course, as you may understand, e-waste imports with no documentation, etc., can be defined as illegal in several. I mean, depending on the characteristics of these imports. So in that project, we looked at the different characteristics, and we came down to a conclusion. We add also other type of studies, as well as analysis of trade statistics for valuable materials that are hardly found anywhere else, but only in e-waste. And also we analyze the PCBs flows.
Okay. Thanks, Vanessa. Maybe you have a look at the chat again, and maybe you can answer the ones we did not have take time just in a written format. And then I would like to move over to Noemi Pralat. I don't know actually how you pronounce your last name, but I think it's Noemi Pralat. She's an e-waste consultant at the International Telecommunication Union, ITU. She's also presenting the part ITU was covering from the Global E-Waste Monitor. We'll talk about the status of, policies and e-waste legislation in Africa. Please, Noemi, you will share your presentation yourself.
Good morning. Yeah, can you see my screen, full screen?
Yes, perfect. Yeah.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. My name is Noemi Prada. I work at the International Telecommunication Union on e-waste policy and circular economy for electronics. So first of all, let me thank all of the hosting team for extending the invitation for us to come and present on e-waste regulatory frameworks and EPR take-back systems for electronics. I was really pleased to hear more about the AfricaMaVal projects and objectives, so I'll focus my presentation on giving you an overview for Africa. Some of you may be familiar with ITU, some of you may be not. So the ITU is the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies, ICTs. What does it have to do with e-waste legislation, you would ask me? In fact, we have a growing stream of activities linked to the environment, which cover e-waste policy support, e-waste data support, and enhanced circularity for electronics. And we also work on greening the digital transformation. And in terms of e-waste policy support, we have worked and currently work all around the world with countries who have expressed a willingness to build strong circular systems for electronics. So currently we have open projects in Paraguay, in Thailand, in Mongolia, and in Africa we currently work with Uganda, Rwanda, Malawi, and Zambia, but we also have many other closed projects such as in the Gambia, Niger, and so on. Firstly, let me stress why having e-waste legislation is important. So you've heard from Vanessa, who has presented the latest global findings from our Global E-Waste Monitor 2024. And we also document in this report that 81 countries have adopted e-waste policy, legislation, or regulation worldwide. Sometimes several of these documents for e-waste. And out of these 81 countries, 67 have legal provisions on EPR for e-waste. And generally, the presence of a legislation, such document tells us whether environmentally sound e-waste management has occurred. Why so? Because countries with legislation achieve on average a collection and recycling rate of 25% for e-waste, whilst most of the countries without such documents are closer to zero. So obviously not having a strong regulatory framework hinders the potential for circularity, and it also comes at high risks for the environment and human health. So let's zoom onto Africa. In the entire continent, 11 countries have a national e-waste policy, legislation, or regulation. These are the 2022 estimates. In Northern Africa, it's Egypt. In Eastern Africa, Madagascar, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. In Southern Africa, South Africa, and Zambia. And in Western Africa, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria. Finally, for Central Africa, Cameroon has such document. 9 countries out of these 11, they use the EPR principle, Extended Producer Responsibility Principle. I will explain more about the principle later on. And these countries are Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, Egypt, Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zambia. And I'll also added to the slide several countries on which we should have our eyes, because they're in the process of developing or adopting their first instruments on e-waste. As an incomplete sample, only for examples, Burundi, Kenya, Botswana, Malawi, Mauritius, Namibia, Niger, the Gambia, and Senegal are concerned and in this process. I've discussed EPR, and this might sound familiar to some of you, but let's now dedicate some time to present an overview of EPR and give you some examples of what it might entail for secondary raw materials in Africa. EPR schemes extended producer responsibility schemes promote the total life cycle environmental improvements of product systems. And what they do is they extend the responsibility of the producers to various parts of the entire life cycle of the product. And they focus especially on the take back, recycling, and final disposal of the products. In a sense, under EPR, producers are not only manufacturers of electronic and electrical equipment, it's the entity which first places the equipment on the market. So in Africa, it might also be importers, resellers, as well as manufacturers, obviously. So EPR shifts the responsibility of these entities for the life cycle to these entities for the product lifecycle, and these entities are thereby incentivized to invest in more eco-friendly designs or products that can be repaired, remanufactured, recycled. There are two types of EPR, individual or collective, which I've detailed on this slide. There are 5 pillars of EPR. Obviously, a strong EPR system is based on business and finance, being self-financing, covering the cost of waste management operations, and the private sector has an essential role to play thereby. Monitoring and control is important for clear enforcement of a system, transparent data collection, and ensuring fair competitive ground. Marketing and awareness of consumers to ensure that they participate in take-back schemes for their electronics, as well awareness of businesses to be part of the system. Policy and regulation is important, having policies which define clear roles and responsibilities, having an involved government. And finally, technology and skills, because obviously skilled workers and appropriate technologies are needed across the value chain for the system to function. I would like to give you several examples of our projects, and I will specifically tell you about our current projects in Rwanda and Zambia, because I heard that most of your activities are localized around mineral ores in Africa. In Rwanda, a 2016 e-waste management policy provides guidance for the efficient and effective management of electronic and electrical equipment, and a 2018 e-waste regulation sets out measures to tackle the end of life of electronics and to promote resource efficiency. Rwanda also has a strong circular economy roadmap and action plan to boost sustainability in a number of domains, including on complex and hazardous waste streams. The 2018 regulations have an Article 24, which sets provision on EPR for e-waste, and the government is currently scoping how and where to register producers and to determine the potential costs required to operate an EPR system in the country. Since 2021, ITU has supported Rwanda through 3 projects, which built on the 5 components of EPR that I presented earlier on. On the business and finance side, this is what currently occupies us. We are consulting with private sector and government stakeholders to create a budgeting tool for a producer responsibility organization fee model. On the policy and regulation side, we are supporting the finalization of regulations for producer registration. On the technology and skills side, we have met several times with private sector representatives for the entire value chain to train them on what EPR meant for their activities. And for monitoring and control, we are involved in the design and architecture of an EPR digital service to allow proper data registration and flows of information and materials in the EPR system. Finally, in terms of marketing and awareness, I've featured several slides several pictures here on my slide, because Rwanda launched a very successful campaign called #GreenRwanda, where citizens were encouraged to bring back their old devices and they would receive coupons for mobile telephony networks in return. Do not be afraid of the graph and all of its arrows. EPR is in practice a complex system, but I'll try and make it simple. In Rwanda, a producer of electronic equipment, which is the entity who first places equipment on the market, registers with the Rwanda Inspectorate Competition and Consumer Protection, called RICA. And in return, it receives automatic membership in what is called PSF, which is a producer responsibility organization. This means that Rwanda has a collective EPR scheme to which producers adhere and pay fee. They also provide data and they report to the collective organization. PSF would then allocate budgets to awareness and research and to its operations. PSF is registered and under oversight with the Rwanda Utilities Regulatory Authority, which is the custodian authority for the EPR regulations in the country. And for waste management operations, PSF usually contracts third-party e-waste operators, which are themselves licensed by and report to RURA. Some of these contracts might include, for example, how to deal with revenues made from selling secondary raw materials extracted from e-waste, where beforehand the materials would either pile up in storage locations. The system creates incentives for the flow of information and materials, which then boosts the recovery of materials, feeding into national market for raw materials. The goal in Zambia is to get inspired by this system that I presented for Rwanda and build a similar system, because currently Zambia has several legal documents applying to e-waste. Also adopted in 2018, the Zambia regulations on EPR are a legally binding instrument, which has not frequently been implemented, but now the government has started revising these regulations, and ITU were providing support to the Zambian government in that matter. Regionally speaking, there are several areas where a regional harmonization approach might be favorable. For example, strengthening regulations, type approval procedures for the import of ICT equipment, defining producers is important, categorization of e-waste, collection, dismantling, and treatment standards would facilitate transboundary movements and proper management of e-waste. Having PRO schemes and getting inspired by neighboring countries is always a good idea. And finally, regionally harmonizing approaches to prevent illegal practices is a strong move as well. So key takeaways would be remembering the number of countries which have a policy, legislation, or regulation on e-waste, 11 countries, 9 of which use the EPR scheme. I've also noted several initiatives are building EPR and take-back systems for e-waste in the region, but there is no one-size-fits-all solution to building a robust EPR for e-waste, but always it's good to hear from good practices and lessons from around the continent that can be adapted to local situations. Strong systems, they usually include participatory approaches, stakeholder buy-in, they have realistic expectations, and obviously regulations that are tailored to the national and regional context. Finally, I would really like to highlight that the private sector has a role to play to create and extend the value chain beyond the end of life of electronics. So here I added 3 key resources for you to dive deeper into the topics I just presented, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Noemi. Also, this is very interesting. Now we have a few minutes to go into some questions. I had, I think, one question from Fred. He also meant that you talk too fast. I don't know what he meant, but he's curious about the informal sector in Rwanda. If you know anything about this, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but or you know the details. But how did you include them in national scheme, or is there any incentives to include them, etc.?
Obviously, there's always in when you set up systems in all of the countries we've worked with, one of the big discussion is how to include the informal sector. It's always difficult, but in that sense, setting up the strong regulatory framework helps, because it creates incentives in a sense for entities or people, individuals and small companies to integrate the system and benefit from in the case of Rwanda, the collective EPR scheme. Yeah, I don't usually, you know, the EPR regulation, they don't ban the informality in articles and so on. What works is really creating incentives for their integration.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we get back to that at the end in the discussion. So there's Julia is also asking about the free riders. Free riders has been a topic always when talking about the EPR. 20 years ago in Europe, the same question. So is there, how do you deal with that? Do you know in the one policies and regulations you have supported in African countries?
So for example, we're currently asking this question for Zambia, because in Zambia there's a lot of informality, and if you go onto the streets of Lusaka, you'll see informality in the sense that you'll see people with signs with buying scrap metals, for example, and a lot of that. So one strategy, how do we identify them? We really encourage, usually in the discussion, you have regulatory entities in the countries. In Zambia, for example, you have ZEMA and ZICTA, the Zambian Environmental Management Agency, which holds a registry of different entities dealing with e-waste, and this helps in the sense that usually it provides already a good basis of where to look to identify free riders. And what is I can see the question, what is the process to get them registered? Obviously, I think this touches upon as well the question that I just said, is creating incentives. What are incentives to contribute to the scheme? Because it's tricky to get importers on board with EPR. I guess for now it's difficult to set up schemes, obviously, with a lot of informality around it. But if you create them in the sense that you have a participatory approach, whole of society approach, getting all of the entities on board, and this flow of information and material, as I've shown on the graph for Rwanda, it really helps.
Okay, thank you. I see, Giulio, maybe if you spare your comment, you integrated in your presentation, then we move on to Susan, who is actually also representing South Africa.
I just saw the last question from Fred. What about the factors again for regional integration, harmonization? So here's the slide if you want to take a screenshot.
Yeah, Noemi, also feel free maybe to go quickly through the comments and reply to them as you see fit in a written format. Then we would move on to the next presentation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I cannot share my screen, it says. I think you need to first unshare from your side that I can share mine. Thank you so much. That looks better. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Right. Wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present today. I'm presenting today on behalf of the African Circular Economy Network, and I'll give you a bit of an introduction of what this is all about. But I try to focus on what are the challenges and can we create new pathways that actually lead to more equitable global North and South value chain. I'm quite passionate about that subject, and I'd like to just give you my narrative and my view on this. So first of all, ACEN, African Circular Economy Network, for people who might not know it, our vision is to build a restorative African economy that generates well-being and prosperity, inclusive of all its people. So new forms of economic production, consumption, which maintain and regenerate its environmental resources. So that is really one of the things that when you talk about global circular economy discussions in the global north, this is very much about product innovation. in Africa, we have a much higher social kind of context in terms of what the circular economy needs to deliver on. And that also plays into the fact because we do have a much bigger problem with informal sectors and things like that. And, that needs to speak to this. So very quickly, I have been in e-waste projects since forever, 2004, like 20 years now. There was an organization, a voluntary organization that DESCO was also part of, called Southern African E-Waste Alliance for 10 years. And then I've been a co-founder and executive director of ASIN in 2016. At the moment, I work actually on a project called TREE, Sustainable Recycling Industries, which is managed by the World Resources Forum and run in 3 countries. The key outcomes of the TREE project are related to assisting our government in policy development, also the development of norms and standards, which are then related to specific activities in e-waste management, the development of training of accredited curriculum and general awareness raising and education, and finding solutions on problematic fractions. So I'd like to kind of share with you my opinion of why we are actually losing our resources twice as we currently sit in the global value chain, okay? And if you look over the entire life cycle and not just on e-waste. So the first resource loss, I think, is really on raw materials. And that is clearly linked to the fact that there are large-scale primary mining activities. And I think with Europe's Green Deal and the commitment to move to renewable energy, that comes obviously with a price. And we have very limited mineral beneficiation locally. So mostly Africa is still locked into this old role of handing over the resources for the global north, right? And you could obviously say it contributes to Africa's GDP, but keep in mind, GDP is not a Gini index. And unfortunately in Africa, this is very, very often like that very few people are getting very rich and enriching themselves, and nothing trickles down to the people. So always look at the Gini index if you want to see how well an African country is doing. So what we're taking out there are obviously critical raw materials, gold, cobalt, copper, tantalum, and all of those are crucial building blocks for manufacturing that I said you need for the windmills and solar plants and so on. The manufacturing happens in China, the assembly in Asia, and then the electronics are utilized until they reach their useful lifetime, which is when we're losing the second time around, because we then receiving a few of those things back, and we're also generating a big amount of e-waste ourselves. And in Africa, as you learned already, e-waste is predominantly treated by the informal sector, and this is at a very high environmental health and safety cost to Africa because it's marked by cherry picking, only taking out the value fraction, and large-scale burning, dumping, and habitat destruction. And that becomes more and more evident all over the African continent. Yes, benefits do exist. It kind of adds to informal people's living kind of opportunity, but do they really outweigh the negative consequences? And again, what we need to point out is how we're losing the resources twice. With the recycling going on, be it formal or informal, and processing capacities are lacking. So all the good stuff that has value and could actually add value again back to Africa is again exported because we don't have end processing facilities. And this is how the impact of e-waste processing looks like in an informal value chain, which is unfortunately the predominant value chain, as you've heard. E-waste gets even imported. We know that up to 30% of what comes in as end-of-life equipment on its last leg is already e-waste. And yes, there are some pros. It increases the GDP of African countries, access to electronics, but the lifespan of those things are very short. Yes, there are positives. A lot of reuse, repair, refurbish, recycling is going on. Very innovative. I've seen myself, like in Ghana, people are amazing. In South Africa, interestingly, the markets of repair, refurbish, especially with ICT, is very much cornered actually also by non-South Africans. Pakistanis are quite prevalent there. And yeah, and we have an income, but there's a lot of discarded resources. And then it starts becoming really hairy because yes, dismantling gives you income, but lots of discarded resources, and it's done under great health risks. And then obviously going down to open burning, discarding, there's nothing positive about it. It just loses resources and affects the health of people and the environment. And we heard about the dismal continental recycling rate of Africa, right? And where we are standing, and as you can see, in Southern Africa, in the SADC region, we're sitting at 4%, and South Africa, I'm proud to say, is 10%. But if you compare this overall of 0 to 0.5 of what we heard mostly happening in Africa, compared to a European recovery rate, which is really showing you nothing really happens in the absence of legislation to do so. And we don't have the e-waste directive, and that is the direct picture of what it looks like because of that. And you can see a lot is uncontrolled, as we learned. The majority is uncontrolled flows, both for import and exports. And yeah, so Africa is sitting very much at the receiving end. So all those pretty pink arrows are pointing towards Africa, which is not good, because those show you the uncontrolled e-waste that is actually hitting the continent. And there is a little stream going from the Southern African region and a little bit from also Ghana and Nigeria back to Europe. And we want to find out what that is. And that's exactly playing into what I'm saying. The few things that come out and flow back to Europe are basically the value fractions. And I just want to show this in the South African case. This is a bit of an older slide, but it still hits on the point. We have a whole bunch of recyclers, and this research, which is a few years old now, looked at what are they doing, how many collect, how much dismantle, and you can see it gets very, very thin. Up to dismantling, all of those guys are there, but when it comes to pre-processing, it's already very much less, which would be mechanical processing. And then when it comes really to the refining part, which would be we have literally two. We have SA precious metal, which do hydrometallurgical processing, and Rand refinery. But those refineries cannot even be compared with a Umicore or a Boliden. They really can only crudely extract some gold and not 17 elements like a Umicore. And that is really what constitutes in South Africa the situation. So we do have 30 plus formal companies that drive e-waste recycling. We have really state-of-the-art recyclers in South Africa that are even Wheelerbex and Senelec compliant. We have also recyclers that offer highly specialized treatment solutions already for lamps and lithium-ion batteries. And we have some unique features. I'll talk about it in terms of EPR later. Very important, our EPR fees are ring-fenced. That was a huge fight, because initially our government didn't want to ring-fence them. And that would have meant that funds that are raised on producer level would have not had to be directed to the purpose of collecting and treating safely e-waste. And we have 8 PROs that are actually now trying to rope in all those producers. So what are the key takeaways from Africa? First of all, that people need to be aware, and I saw this in the Global E-Waste Monitor report, and it shocked me, is that the externalized costs that are placed on Africa, related to primary resource extraction and e-waste management, they are absolutely massive. The value that was generated out of e-waste was something like $28 billion US, and most of that happens in Europe. That value generation happens in the global north, okay? But the external cost globally was $78 billion US in terms of costs externalized, and that obviously trickles down to degrading environment, loss of biodiversity. And I bet you that the majority of the 7-8 billion are sitting in Africa. So we can just see, in the absence of e-waste legislation, the formal recycling infrastructures have historically emerged in regional pockets, and were thereby driven by economies of scale, okay? And there's a dilemma of the informal sector accessing e-waste first and then undercutting those properly controlled processing and those properly controlled recyclers that pay premiums. And I'm sure that Julia will be more than happy to tell you, how much it means to be a formal recycler in South Africa, and to how many hoops you have to jump. So their cherry picking directly undermines, obviously, the formal recyclers. And we do have them in Africa, And we, not just in South Africa, there are some others that are excellent and exist and create a difference, like Nami Green in Namibia, Hinckley in Nigeria, City Waste in Ghana, We Center in Kenya, and we learned about EnviroSurf, which is a state-of-the-art facility that I've seen myself, which is unbelievably modern and well run. So what are further key takeaways? Yes, the development of regulatory instruments, which is both policy and EPR regulations, is on the rise, and it's actively driven. So thank you very much to ITU, the GIZ, TREE, the African Circular Economy Alliance. All those are pushing for it, but it develops slowly because you need to have also a willing African government, which is easier said than done. And what we see is that in the absence of either a producer initiative or any government sanctions, whatever develops is actually purely free market driven, and it's local, opportunity driven, where you sit, where the value fractions are. And typically it's therefore informal by structure. So we do definitely need EPR, and on an Africa-wide level, and perhaps something even similar to the WE directive that goes actually, on a continental level. But it can be very problematic, specifically if funds are not ring-fenced. And we do have even examples of countries like in Ghana where funds are collected but have not been expended yet. So, it's not as simple as that. EPR is not like the magic bullet, and it needs to be done. It cannot be just taken over from Europe. It needs this African understanding on how it could work or not. The regulation only focusing on material recycling targets is actually a start, but it does very little to promote the reuse of the equipment, and it does really hardly anything to minimize the amount and nothing to affect the product design. So my big beam that I have is to say, but we need to put much stronger pressure on the producers to affect product design. That is the most powerful leverage that we have, okay? We have an EPR regulations in South Africa that are unique in a few ways, which I'm quite proud of, actually, because they actually require the integration of the informal sector, and they also request life cycle analysis from producers, which turns out to be quite problematic when it comes to e-waste, and we're currently grappling on how this can possibly be done. And as you heard, an e-waste policy is in the making, and the norms and standards that are linked to those management activities. So finally, we need EPR fees, and either voluntarily or mandatory, because only those will ensure and finance the proper decontamination and safe final treatment of the problematic weed types and their hazards containing components in place. Without those fees, where we can actually treat the value fractions, the negative ones, the recyclers will only ever be interested also to recycle, what has value, which is obviously understandable. So we need a system that pays the informal sector-based collectors a premium. That is really what the ultimate objective is. And we have one PRO that has started working with a scrap metal dealer in South Africa, where they pay a premium to the informal collectors to say, please bring us the return complete units. You get the best price if you're not fiddling around with it. Very powerful and very promising approach from what we can see. And then also the other thing that's very clear, and that shows what EnviroSurf, for example, the way it's modeling and how it's partnering with Dubai, is where technology is not locally available, an off-taker is needed, and not just for the value fractions, but also to treat problematic fractions. And that is where I heard, for example, EnviroSurf in Rwanda has this off-take agreement with Dubai also for hazardous fractions. So that is a crucial element as well. And then we talked about regional solutions. I'm a big fan of regional solutions because you can easier create an economy of scale. And what would have to happen for SADC countries or IACO would be to create regional green e-waste channels where e-waste could flow from surrounding countries to hubs. So in our case, it would be South Africa, so that, it could go to recyclers like DESCO through green channels. We would have to obviously de-risk those green channels from the Basel Convention perspective. It's almost impossible at the moment. So there would have to be some work to be done to actually make this possible, that this kind of flows can go, so that we can start Africa-wide internally to treat our stuff and recycle it more efficiently. And then, what I also would like to see is please, can we start creating more high-value green jobs? that go along the entire e-waste value chain, and that are also oriented at higher skills, where we actually realize that functional recovery is more preferred than just material recovery, and where we have actually more sophisticated approaches, specifically also for emerging e-waste types. And then the final advice, don't try to formalize the informal sector. The notion alone is already a disaster. The informal sector does not want to get formalized, but create rather the enabling conditions so they can continue to add value. But it needs to happen in a safe setup space, like a co-working facility can be there, even where they could safely dismantle and then get paid for both the services they render, as well as the value of the waste materials that they collect. And that would be me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. I think this is perfect also to hand over directly to the practitioners, because you were very close to the recycling sector directly, to the infrastructure, to the innovation. So after having heard all the losing the resources, actually there are people on the ground who do innovation in Africa, and we have two examples. We have a company which I know since almost 20 years, and which is an amazing company because it's also the first company I know that existed on the African continent to focus on e-waste recycling, and that's Desco, electronic recyclers, so pioneers in Africa, and it's Giulio Airaga, actually the second generation I know from this company, which is really nice. So Giulio, let us know about your innovation in e-waste recycling in Africa.
Great, thank you. And then just a quick one, will you guys be moving the slides for me?
Yeah, we can do that. You just tell us and Rebecca will move it for you.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, guys, for the opportunity to be here. Firstly, let me just put my video on as well. All right, so again, thank you very much, guys. It's been quite interesting actually to listen to the prior presentations. I think it's actually more value to talk about these things than what I have to present, but I still will go through it. Because yeah, it's been quite interesting so far. So you can go to the next slide so long, Rebecca. And I think if you just hit next about 6 times just to get rid of those factors, one more, and then 2 more. And then again, perfect. So Desco Electronic Recyclers has been in the market for about 32 years. Our primary focus is electronic waste recycling. So it is anything with a plug or battery, as we know. But our focus is not limited to the ICT sector. We also focus on medical electronics, military, telecoms, infrastructure. We're not limited to any kind of industry. And just jumping straight to the whole EPR reporting aspect of that, it really helps us aid our producers and clients that produce very, very complicated electronics. For example, if you have someone like a Siemens technology, they might make household switchgear for an inverter, but then they also make complicated machinery as well. So it's on sort of 2 opposite spectrums of what electronic waste is produced. So the nice thing is that when something like that comes to Desco, we report on all of those factors, but I'll jump into that a little bit later. The secondary aspect that Desco focuses on is the reuse aspect. So it is the reuse of IT electronics, mainly office equipment. We then conduct certified data destruction and data erasure. The difference between the two is that it is a destruction of a physical hard drive that you shred it, and then it becomes a few different commodities like aluminium, metal, and circuit boards. Sorry, I've just thought that I'm actually talking quite fast. I remember there was a comment about talking quite quickly, so I'll just slow down a bit. Another aspect that actually ties quite nicely into the brand protection, into the EPR, is brand protection management. What we've noticed very recently is that producers are actually starting to come to us more and more to destroy products that they are either doing a take back for, or products that if there is a manufacturing line and there's a defect in a product line of, let's say, 100 to 1,000 units, they'll actually come to us, and to protect their own brand and just to ensure that it doesn't go on market as an inferior product, they destroy it at our company. So that not only protects their data and their brand, it also helps them sort of mitigate producing a product to destroy straight away in an irresponsible manner. So it's a nice It's a nice factor that actually ties into the certification aspect, the data aspect, and the e-waste recycling aspect. And there's even a small trigger for EPR itself. Some of the new focuses that we have is the lithium-ion battery recycling and the solar panel recycling. You can go to the next slide. So on the battery recycling aspect, and it's something that I wanted to just make a comment on with Suzanne's presentation, is that there is actually recyclers locally that do have solutions to complicated products. And the nice thing is that our process to recycle or pre-process printed circuit boards is it's a mechanical process that goes through a whole bunch of different shredders, eddy currents, metallic separators, and we end up with a pure metallic product and a pure waste product or plastic or fiberglass product. And that is almost, I wouldn't call it refined, but it's treated to the point that it can go through one refinement process thereafter. But the nice thing is that that same machinery, because it has quite a lot of lines of equipment, it can be used for the same lithium-ion battery process. So what we have is we have a pre-process externally from our facility just to mitigate any ignition risks when it comes to the batteries. But once the materials are liberated, we then put it through our circuit board processing plant. It's got dust extraction that captures that sort of very, very lightweight black mass. And all the other fractions that you have from a steel, copper, and plastic, there is a local market for. You have to process quite a lot of batteries in order to get a black mass fraction. It's usually a roughly less than 20% of a black mass fraction that comes out. That's the only product that we then export. You can just go to the next slide. On the solar panel recycling, we've just started to research that. We're actually working with a local partner in order to come up with solutions for that. So very simply, there is the handling and transportation is the biggest issue that we're having at the moment from a cost perspective. And even from a market perspective, there is a solution that we are trying to do, and theoretically it works quite well, but we need a project of quite a lot of scale in order to test it properly. The issue that we have is that the fee that we are charging them is unacceptable because it's too high. Even if you have someone that accepts a fee to recycle it, you then have a second cost, which is the transport. What we have found is that in order to do a project of, let's say, 1,000 panels, you would have to do something like 6 different truckloads of haulage. And then what that would mean is that your transport cost equates to 50% of the cost just to process it. So it becomes really expensive. Now, that is where the EPR should be assisting us, but there is probably like 3 or 4 solar panel recycling companies that have registered with the entire PRO scheme. I'm going to touch on that in a moment as well. But anyway, even if you get past the handling aspect, then we do a sorting, which is the reuse panels that still actually have an efficiency to be reused, and the recycling panels. We're mainly focusing on the recycling panels, so then we will disassemble them. We'll take the aluminium off, the junction boxes, the cables, the inverters, and the battery separately, and they have their own unique processes. From a processing side, we then shred their entire panel, and it gives us about 7 different commodities that have a unique downstream vendor recycling process. So we have a theoretical process at the moment. It is working, and we've done some tests, but we need a bigger project of scale to do it. If you can go to the next slide. On the EPR reporting, this is the most important thing that should be assisting us. So as I've said, the battery and solar producers are not accepting the fee. They are not even contributing to PROs at the moment. Very few producers are on board. To further this, even from the e-waste aspect, I think between the 3 or 4 PROs that I'm aware of, there's roughly 200 producers in South Africa that have registered. Now, that's very low, considering that there must be in excess of thousands of producers out there. So that's quite tricky because we need that buy-in from producers to claim from them effectively and to report on the data that we're getting. So something that DESCO has invested quite heavily in is a software program to track and trace all of this data. So historically, what would happen is that you would have a full truck of material that would come in, it would come over a weighbridge, and you would weigh it as 2 tons of electronic waste. You don't know which producers to allocate that to. You don't know which producer has a higher weight, a higher percentage, which producer is actually doing well. You don't know who to report that data to. So what we've done is we've done the extra step of now taking that load of electronic waste and physically breaking it down to say there was 100 kilograms of HP, Canon, Siemens, whoever it may be. And then we physically report per load that we get in And then we build that data. And then when we have a conversation with the PRO, we can specifically tell them this is exactly how much this producer did. Now, the issue with that is that we've had to invest at our own cost to get the software and build it ourselves to our needs. We've hired 15 extra laborers just to actually do the process, because it's slowed down our efficiency in terms of processing everything as bulk weights, because now we have to categorize everything. But it is very important, because then when we have a conversation with producers, we can give them absolutely accurate data. The reason that I also asked about the free riding question earlier was for this very point, because now when we then evaluate a load that has a whole bunch of producers, I can go to a PRO and I can see, okay, well, there's 5 producers registered there and I have all of their data. But according to my data, I have 5 extra producers that I don't see on any of the PROs. And then based on that, like, my system can actually say, look, there's no producers registered on any of the PROs. These are theoretically the free riders. But that information is available, but we are unaware what to do with that. Because now none of the PROs are going to use that data to actually claim. We can't claim on it because it doesn't belong to anyone. Final point is that the bottom table, sorry, just go back. Yeah, perfect. The final table that you see on the bottom there, that is just an example of the categories that we do. So very simply, the waste manifest documents is the collection document. The ticket number is the scale ticket with the weights. The supplier is who we collected from. So if it's an ABC company, that is who we collect from. And then you can see there's the make, which is HP, the description, which is the laptop. The net weight, the size, whether it's large, small, medium, or large. There's a barcode per bulk weight. Serial number is the choice of the producer or the people that we collect from, so that's optional. EPR status is whether they are none, so they would be a free rider. And then, or if it says they're EWASA, ERA, the relevant different types of PROs, we can actually say who it is, filter it out, and then send it to the producer. And then it obviously has a collection date. The nice thing about that is when we then engage with the PRO, if they ask us for a specific period of time, be it 1 month, a quarter, or a year, we can filter it and send it to them as they need. Cool, and that's the next slide. So yeah, that's everything that I can compartmentalize in 5 minutes. I think I went over time.
No problem. Thank you very much, Julia. Very interesting. That's exactly what we want to hear. We want to have these examples of innovation from Africa. And we have a second company invited, that's Electro-Recycling from Ghana. It's Nana who will present. That's let's say a new kid on the block, or a newer, also a few years old already, which came with a lot of innovation to Ghana to tackle the issue of e-waste in a formalized way. Nana,
yeah,
please.
Thank you. Maybe I'll do the sharing from my side. Can everyone see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Yeah. Come again? Can anyone see my slide?
Yeah, we can see it, Nana.
Okay, super. Yeah, my name is Nana Konadu. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Electro-Recycling Ghana. Yeah, we are into, although we call electro-recycling, but we believe the last thing that recycling companies should do is to recycle. Yeah, our company is satisfied with the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency Ghana. The company was initiated by me and my partner, Hans-Werner Müller. He's a German, so we have a lot of knowledge sharing from Germany, also from Ghana. Yeah, I mentioned about, yes. Okay, what we focus more is on the reuse part and refurbishment and reassembly. For instance, here in West Africa, we have over 100 million people, which doesn't have necessary access to ICT gadgets, name it laptop, first generation of smartphones, televisions. So here, as I said, we focus on the reuse part, so we generate a very few waste from our processes or from our facility. But in this case, we speak more about the materials inflow. The there's a quite challenging getting materials in Ghana because of the informal sectors, especially from household and repair shops, because those collectors, they're over 30,000 in numbers. They're actually strong, they're everywhere, they work every day. You can find them all over the places. They're also financed by middlemen and their bosses, which even some are even engaged in human trafficking. It means they will bring those young guys from their villages, especially from northern part of Ghana, which the economical situation is very, very critical. So they will send them to mainly Accra and Kumasi, that's the capital, and the second capital, Kumasi. And yes, as I mentioned, they are mainly financed by the middlemen and their bosses. But then the middlemen in Ghana are always financed by some Asians people, which also locate for a very long time in Ghana. The reasons why the Asians are financing them is that many smelter or recycling companies have moved from mainly China to Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia. They are very, very strong in Ghana. There are many occasions we've been approached to supply the materials. But then, of course, we are satisfied and we are doing the right thing. We want to keep on doing the right thing. We don't do any businesses with them. What we have done in the past is we have sent some materials through the Basel Convention to Germany. Okay, most of the items were in the green list, and it was quite challenging for us. For instance, we had a container in Hamburg, I can mention the city, and the importer company took about 14 days to bring out the container from the port, whereby he mentioned containers from Asia, I mean, with a different product, take them 2 to 3 days to clear it from the port. So it made all our products becomes very expensive. So although we are trying to do the right thing, it's quite difficult to be successful. Yeah, as I mentioned, we focus more on the reuse, but then there is also some clients, international brands in Ghana and the region, which we work with them successful way. In this case, we collect the waste because most of the materials cannot be reused. For instance, we have a client like Philips, Google, MTN, Angry Gold, USAID, Vodafone, Ghana Investment Communication, Ghana Water Company, and one of our biggest clients is the Ghana Electra Commission. Here, we had a very huge challenge in the past because the Electoral Commission is, of course, the organization who's responsible for our election. And Ghana, in 6 months' time, we have a general election again, and we had some materials which are meant for recycling. And we were all over the news that electoral recycling has cooperated with the Electoral Commission to destroy Ghana properties, you know, and in the few days, we had over 700 people visit our website. So whereby we had the permit, I mean, we are brought together with the Electoral Commission through the EPA. So it was genuine, it was, the procurement was everything in the right way, but then we were politicized, right? So it's quite also challenging to do the right thing in Ghana. So end of the day, everything is fine and people understood us. Yeah, what we plan to do is really, I mean, we don't say waste when it comes to the final stage, you know, we call it resources. And our wish or what we plan to do is to have a facility, I mean, repair, reuse, dismantle facility that we can work closely with the West, because there's a lot, as Vanessa mentioned, 22.3 of the waste are collected worldwide. I mean, Europe is, I believe, is quite smaller because they have challenging with the recycling facility. You know, we believe the manual dismantling can create a green jobs here in the country. where we have over 20% youth unemployed, Nigeria over 50%, you know, and we know that some of the Asia countries, especially China, they make a very good use of the waste, where they were able to create secondary raw materials and come up with affordable products. So I think we'll be talking more and more about the problems than about the solutions. And of course, it's good all these policies working with the foreign organization, you know, to identify the problem. But we wish that we can see the opportunity in these challenges, you know, where probably the Basel Convention, if they identify a company does the right thing, that our story, the company story can be heard, you know, where it's the movement of materials can and be easier. Of course, you need to prove to them what you do with all the materials, which is very possible because other countries have successful done it. So, and this is some of our dismantling processes. Here is assembling of, we came up with a new televisions, which we use as LCD panels. We convert it to LED and come up with a product which is about $25 for the people in the remote areas. We're able to sell over 20,000. We also have built our own power bank using the second lithium cell from laptops, you know, which also is on the market below $10. That is a part of the processes. Here are some PCB boards that we generated. And of course, the metal has the market in Ghana. But then the PCB boards, we have currently about 6 tons. We've been approached a lot here, local smelter without licenses, so we refuse to give it out. But the last few months, we've been in discussion with some investors to put up a smaller smelter plant here in Ghana so that at least we can close the loop. Here are the processes of a cable. Cable is actually quite challenging. When you guys have heard about Abubushi, the major problem they had was the burning of the cables. Here we're doing it the right way with these strippers. If there's a bigger one, stripper, and this is a shredder here on your right side. And very interesting part is the water separation, where we, after the shredding, we separate the PVC from the coppers. With the PVC, actually, we also discussion with some investors to bring a floor mat machine. You know, you can add cassava or natural starch to it, and you'll be able to come up with a floor mat which you can use for playground or for horses riding, so on. Then another processes also help us generating revenue, thermoplastics. Here we have the support from SRR and also GIZ, so we identify the different materials like HIP, HIPS, PS, ABS, and so on. And we also have the market in Europe as well. But unfortunately, with the right investment, for now we send it out as a flakes, but with the right investment, we'll be able to produce our own pellets. And also we are thinking about using those recycled plastics for our TV cases and also battery cases. Yeah, and this is my team. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Thank you very much for this very nice presentation and having these insights. You know, it's always good to see pictures and see how you work. So now we are actually, the time of the webinar is almost up, so we'll not have a long discussion. I think the discussion about the value chains, possible investments, etc., we also will take that up in our 3rd edition of the webinar. But I still would like to give all the speakers the opportunity to maybe add a few things and maybe take up some questions if there are still some in the audience. to the two recyclers, to Giulio and Nana, if you think now of the future, how does it look for you? What would you expect? Do you see like a positive development for your business? And what is needed for you from your point of view that you actually can think of new investments? So maybe Giulio first and then Nana.
Oh, no problem. So from my side, the EPR aspect plays a very pivotal role. It's very important that it does work, because what we're seeing from a market perspective is that products are getting cheaper, made with worse value recovery items. Everything nowadays is made out of plastic. Everything is smaller. And the absolute biggest issue that we have is that we have a system to recycle these products. We have a system to recycle a lot of products, but it's the collection mechanism which is the biggest problem. So a brilliant opportunity that we can, I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that maybe Vanessa touched on at the beginning, was the buy-in from, I think, retailers. Sorry, no, she was talking about consumers being one of the biggest contributors to electronic waste. And that's so true, is that individuals are not going to take the time to go to a recycler. They're not going to go and find their closest recycler. Your producers, your malls, and your retailers need to be the ones that can sort of collaborate with an electronic waste recycler to make points all over the country to recycle e-waste as a take back. So very quickly, I mean, Desco's got a process where we engage with retailers at large malls, but consumers don't often go there. They go to small shopping centers or small shops, grocery shops. And it's in those grocery shops where you need to have small collection centers so that you have that reinforced message. Every single time you go and buy milk and bread or whatever, you're constantly seeing this little bin there. It might be small, but it's there. Then those retailers and shopping centers need to be able to centralize all of that equipment, because the cost for us to go out and get it is too expensive and it's not feasible. But if all of it can be centralized, it can really help for us to not only capture that data, but then report and recycle it as well. So there's a massive opportunity there, and I would love to engage with more people. And that's there. From the recycling of secondary raw materials, it's a constant process of technology development. So as I said, we're looking at the solar and battery at the moment. We're collaborating with different recyclers to come to solutions. And every day we're just taking a small step closer and closer to that goal.
Okay, thank you, Giulio. Nana, how does the future look like for Ghana?
I would say look very bright. You know, I travel around a lot around the world, and there's a business case I saw with China, for instance. You know, China used to send a lot of materials to California, and California would generate a lot of waste. You know, in every country you have more economic growth. There's also a lot of waste that are generated. And they had an issue with household plastics. So they were sending those plastics to Texas, trying to use the Mexicans to do the sorting. But it's only happened for a short time. Then the China said, why don't you put those household plastic in the container and send it to us? Because those shipping containers were coming back empty to China. So China took opportunities from these raw materials, uses local workers to do the sorting, and they came up with a polyester textiles. You can find a plastic for 50 cents or $1. Of course, they have now grown. It's quite difficult for them to find manual dismantler pickers. And I think this kind of chances, opportunity is a shift globally. And I believe Ghana can be an interesting country for this. We have a direct seaport. For instance, sending a container from Antwerp to Ghana from Rotterdam port is 10 days. And sending the whole container back is just $900. It's quite cheaper from sending a container from Hamburg to Poland, for instance. So we should take the opportunity from this waste or from these resources that are generated worldwide. And yeah, of course, we need to also consider the environment. You know, apart from all the Asian success, a lot of people were wearing nose masks before COVID came. So we also need to consider the environment and learn from their mistakes that they did, you know, when they were growing. So, but of course, as I mentioned, there's so much policies, there's so much discussion about the problem in Africa. I believe also the government opened their doors too wide, you know, to showcase the problem. but we should look at opportunity as well. And yeah, so I believe that it will be great when it comes to wasting of time.
Okay, that's great to hear. I definitely can say, you know, there's much more momentum these days than I actually started my first e-waste project in South Africa 18 years ago. And when we talked about e-waste, they were just looking at us, what? What do you talk about? So it's definitely completely changed, I think. So we have also questions from the audience. There's Jean-Claude. Jean-Claude, please.
Thank you, Matthias. So I am the AfricaMaVal coordinator, and as shown by Rebecca, we are looking for investment in Africa. And so as it is the end of the webinar, which has been very interesting, and especially for me, which is not so much in that field. I am more in the mining area. And so we are looking, in fact, for a proposal for investment. So we can look at developing a facility, increasing the production, or increasing also the added value. So we meet, I think, with Nana in Geneva, and so when you have idea about development of your facilities and creating more added value in Africa, so it's typically the target that we have. And so we are open to any countries in Africa. So we have get one proposal through WRF already, coming from South Africa on recycling. But we are very open and very keen to receive more proposals of investment. So we are in touch with European Union, with also the development agency. So we've been speaking about GIZ and KfW, but also the French AFD or other, and the European Union, but also with manufacturers and with the European Raw Material Alliance and so on. So we can try to get investments. And so we are in the middle of our project, so we still have time. We have up to the end of 2025. So we still have time to receive proposal, to analyze it, to look at it with you, and after to look for the financing possibilities, in fact, for the investment. It shows that we need to make a connection also with the European companies, because our target is a win-win solution, so added value in Africa, but also metals for Europe. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean-Claude. That's, of course, a very important information, and good to hear that there are not just opportunities from the view of our African partners, but also from more cooperation with Europe. Shahzad, do you also have a comment or question? Shahzad is actually from our side, from WFA, the coordinator for AfricaMaVal.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar, and also to the speakers for great presentations. Just wanted to echo what Jean-Claude mentioned about investment, and indeed, in addition to that one proposal that we shared, Jean-Claude, both Nana and Giulio, they have filled out the fact sheet with information that we asked them. So their proposals are included already and shared with DMT and the BGR team for assessment. They have provided the data.
Okay.
Thank you, Matthias. Yeah.
Good to hear. So my apologies for taking a little bit more time than we have planned, but I really want to now ask these final questions to our 5 speakers, because I think it's important that we now heard about investments. We talk about responsible value chains between Africa and Europe. And now, of course, it would be interesting to hear from an African perspective, what is a responsible value chain from your perspective? And maybe first from the multilateral, as we call it, side, I'm asking Vanessa and then Noemi, and then I'm coming to our African partners. Vanessa, short statement. This is your final statement, and not extending too long since we are short of time.
Yeah, thank you. No, indeed, I think this is a very important opportunity. And what does it mean for Africa? Definitely, it means also as some of the participants mentioned, to improve the collection scheme and to also find ways to recycle and to close the loops, definitely. Also, and especially finding collaborations with other countries, with other regions, because of course the nature of recycling and of e-waste and electronics is global, is not national or even regional. So that's my take. So we should look for collaborations and optimize the resources and also make the best out of the recycling of electronics.
Thanks, Vanessa. Naomi, what is for you a responsible value chain from Africa, between Africa and Europe?
I think what is marvelous today is I've not heard anyone question an important thing for these value chain is there was no one, well, everyone I think trusts in the shift in categorization and perspectives on e-waste, in the sense that now e-waste is considered here, I think no one questioned it, that it's a resourceful ore for secondary raw materials and not something that is unwanted to be wasted and disposed of. So yeah, one takeaway from me is I showed in my presentation, I think, graphs that highlight that there's a clear link between countries which have a legislation or regulation and higher rates of collection and recycling, which in turn can be favorable for to secure access to secondary raw materials. So the main narrative is there's a lack of proper collection and recycling of e-waste. That's a worldwide issue, obviously, and a strong solution to set up sustainable regulatory systems for e-waste is the principle of extended producer responsibility, which is an important one to ensure a whole of society approach, flows of data, of materials, of information towards the system, and to create incentives for a circular economy for electronics.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. That's a very good statement. Susan, I'm very sure you also have to say something about this. What is a responsible value chain? Maybe also thinking of, is it actually correct to talk about, we also take up the opportunity of the informal sector, because that's one of the topic we touched upon today.
Yeah. No, I think, what it means, like a responsible value chain would be a more value-adding value chain for where Africa is positioned. So, for example, when it comes to the primary resource extraction, that we have more beneficiation opportunities that have, that create a higher value before we export the stuff to Europe on that level. But then also, I would like to see Africa being really positioned in the global e-waste value chain on becoming a hub for developing technical expertise and knowledge to repair and refurbish electronics. We haven't really talked about it. We're all about the materials, but we need to actually create a place where people can actually hone in on functionality recovery. And I would love to see Africa assuming that role, globally, to become that continent where this is happening, with Africans being highly skilled technicians to do this. And then finally, and I will not dwell on it, Matthias, but to rethink this entire idea of selling resources, to say perhaps we should talk about leasing resources in future, because then Africa retains its own wealth. And Europe will be forced to rethink very hard its product designs, because it's never going to be owned by Europe and it belongs to Africa. But this is a discussion for another discussion. Sorry, I had to sneak it in.
Yeah, I was sure you will do. So, but that's excellent. That's excellent. So more from a business perspective, what is a responsible value chain, Giulio?
So I think from my perspective, very simply, the responsible thing to do is to include all the players in the value chain. So drawing from the example of the EPR, what I've found from dealing with producers directly that are either already my customers or clients or recommendations of them is that, one, they're not aware of this whole EPR scheme. So what will happen is the PRO's approach to a producer is very like legislative in the way where it's like, if you don't do this, you're going to get penalized. If you do this, you're going to get penalized. And it's very like this bulldozer approach. Whereas 3-4 years later, the producer only comes to a recycler and says, what should we actually be doing? The PRO only comes to the recycler very much later and says, do you have this data? What do you think should be done? You've got a lot of let's call it unnecessary bureaucracy that happens for whatever agenda it is, but they're not engaging the people that actually do the work to advise on. So there's lots of times where 4 years later, the reason I say 4 years later is that in 2021, the legislation for EPR came out in South Africa. So I'm still having the same conversation with producers today, very powerful producers today, on what is EPR. But that discussion should have happened ages ago while this legislation was sort of taking place. So point being is that it would be nice if we were engaged a lot earlier, and then we could help actually give these producers their data to be compliant. So just engaging recyclers much earlier is important.
Okay, that sounds excellent. That sounds also very much of what I think. We have another business perspective on the question, Nana.
Yeah, Ghana, we had these funds that I think were established 3 years ago. We haven't seen 1 cent from this fund. EPR, fine, is good, but I believe, I mentioned again, some of the Asia countries did on their own, right? We have Ghana, the minimum wages is $25 per month, 25%, $25 per month, which youth employment 20%. We just need materials. We just need materials, create green jobs, creating or dismantling a product where we have the second raw material, it will give us a revenue. So I don't want to wait for EPR. I don't want to wait for any organizations to change the law in my country. Once again, I see opportunity in this problem. And what we Africa probably should do is, I've lived in Germany over 35 years. I know how country was built, right? You do it on your own. You solve problems. You don't wait for external support. And that is what I believe we African, we should try and do it our own, make it happen. And I wrote it in my presentation. We need to tell the African story on our own. I don't believe HP, or let me mention Foxconn and Co. really care about what is happening in Africa. We brought recently over 6,000 iPhone 6 and 6S. That's the first generation of iPhone. We sold it out within a week. So I don't need EPR, So that's what I'm seeing. We just, need to take the opportunity, as the problem as opportunity. That's what I'm seeing. So thank you.
That's a true entrepreneur spirit, I would say, and which I have to say I experienced so many times in Africa. Over the 20 years I have worked together with many countries. So thank you for that. That's actually the resources we find in Africa when we talk about innovation, when we talk about investments. That's the true spirit. Thank you very much, Nana, for this. So my apologies again for having taken too much time from you. Thank you very much, the speakers, for your input, and the audience for being patient with us. If you keep on being interested, you have our contacts for AfricaMaVal. We can also take these discussions offline if you have very important things to discuss with us. We are very happy with this. So with this, I wish you a good rest of the day, soon a good lunch. Thank you very much, and goodbye.